honored to be here tonight, so I thank you for inviting me to be part of this series, these discussions, which are vital, probably the most vital issues of our time. So I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit more than the bio leads to. My name is Michelle Brass. I reside on the Indigenous First Nation, my husband and son. And what my bio doesn't say is that my husband and I both lead a life of ceremony. We walk the path together, and we do work on behalf of our Creator and the good grandmothers and good grandfathers. And so we take a very spiritual approach to life. And so I come here today. A lot of people in the Indigenous Climate Action community are well versed in areas of Indigenous sovereignty and our own natural laws, as well as international agreements, frontline action. Everybody has a different role to play. The role that my husband and I bring is rooting most of our work in ceremony, making sure that we always put that first, and that we adhere to the natural laws that were bestowed upon us by Creator and by the laws of this land. And so all of the work and everything we do in life comes from being grounded in that way. So some of the things I'm going to speak to today are really, this is a spiritual conversation. So much of the conversation around climate change is around science, it's around politics, it's around policies, it's around human nature and our ability to change, it's about taking action, it's about all of these things. And those are all very important, vital elements to this discussion. But for me, this is a very deeply spiritual discussion. So I just want to preface my presentation by saying that some of that, you know where I'm speaking from when I address some of these things. The other thing is that I'm going to ask everyone to keep an open mind and an open heart. That some of the things I'm going to be speaking about may trigger strong feelings, guilt or anger or frustration. But we're living in a time where it's important, it's absolutely critical that we have the courage to have difficult conversations, to speak truth, to dig deep within ourselves, because what we're facing in the world today is going to require us as individuals, us as community members, us as humanity to evolve and to come to this situation, this global crisis from a very deep inner place. It's going to require a lot of self-reflection and the ability to be imaginative, to be creative, to be courageous. And so I just ask that as we have this conversation, just to be aware of that. I ask people if we can all just agree to create safety for one another, and I'm open to questions afterwards. But also the things that we'll be talking about are about our Canada's history, or the country's history, Canada's history. I appreciate the land acknowledgement, and I'll be speaking a little bit more about that as well. So any questions I'll be happy to answer afterwards as well. I do like this to be a discussion. Usually when I do speak about these things, we're often sitting in a circle, or it's more of a discussion as opposed to me being up on a stage above you and speaking. So this is very unnatural. In our culture and our way of speaking, none of us is above anybody else. None of us is like in charge or speak down on anybody. We would often we'll sit on the ground, read a circle, and share ideas. So this setup even is very culturally different than what we would normally do to speak about some of these issues. However, it's okay, and my husband and I and others, we speak in these situations all the time. But there's something about the power of circle and sitting in circle as a community where we can have different ideas, different opinions, strong feelings. And there's something about that power of circle where we can more easily talk through some of those emotions. So I'm here as well because my son is 7 about to be 8, and I'm very concerned about his future, and that I live a life with purpose, and that I come into this world to do the work of the good grandmothers and good grandfathers, which are our spiritual guides. So not everybody is religious or spiritual, but I just want you to know the work I do and the nature of my discussion tonight is deeply rooted in a spiritual aspect. So that's what this will be about. So I'm on the steering committee for a fairly new organization called Indigenous Climate Action. It is a national organization that aims to support Indigenous communities in developing Indigenous-led solutions to climate change. And it's about 2 years old. There was no other national organization in Canada doing this kind of work. And it's really grassroots driven. So we have a small core staff. We had 5 at one point, right now we have 3, maybe hiring another, but most of it is volunteer, and most of it is just supporting and uplifting different voices in the climate change movement. So what I'm going to speak to you tonight is about why land-based Indigenous-led responses are crucial to addressing the impacts of climate change. So first of all, I want to talk about what is climate change. Now, I'm not talking about greenhouse gas emissions, I'm not talking about the science behind it, I'm not talking about any of that. I'm here to talk about an Indigenous perspective on climate change. And it's not that we don't have our own understanding of science. When you get really deep into our ceremonies, in the lodges, and the structure of them, the science of our ecosystems, of the natural laws of the land, how to live in balance with that, it is all integrated in everything. And I'm always astounded that the further I go on this path, how the description of all things scientific, how they would be explained in science, are found and embedded in our lodges and in our natural ways of connecting with the land. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. There's enough scientists out there, there's enough people writing papers, there's enough people writing columns in the papers. You don't need me to talk about that. What I'm here to talk about is how, as Indigenous peoples who are walking a spiritual path, understand climate change. And what climate change is, it is a consequence of what Cree people would call a Stahoan or Chinawin. I'm not a Cree speaker, so forgive me if I'm getting that wrong, but we have been working with our elders and stuff and making sure we get that terminology correct. But Stahoan and Chinawin, these are a breaking of natural law. The breaking of a natural law against a person or against the natural world. So we have natural laws that govern us. So a lot of times it's thought that when Europeans came and colonized these lands, that we were a lawless people, we had no governance systems. You're hearing a lot right now with all the blockades going on, people calling for the rule of law to be enforced. Well, I'll tell you, we have a law. We have the law of the land. It's a natural law. And what climate change is, when you go into our lodges, it is the breaking of a natural law, and that we are suffering the consequences of this. So what is the breaking of a natural law? So we have protocols and codes of behavior that govern how we live in relationship to the land. So the reason I'm holding this right now is because I'm sharing information that we sacrifice for. We have certain protocols that we put in place. We always talk, we say prayers, in order to have this information conveyed in a good way so that we deeply understand what it means. And I'm sharing knowledge with you that I have learned through going through ceremony and being in these lodges. And so I'm adhering to the protocol on my end to make sure that what I share with you is appropriate. So we have protocols and codes of behavior. So some of the things, for example, that we're taught when it comes to the land is often in our ceremonies we'll have a pit, or maybe it's a sweat lodge, or a big lodge, which is like a Sundance lodge or a rain dance lodge. And we often have to dig a hole. We have to dig a hole for a pit for the rocks. We have to dig for our center pole to go down. We have to dig. One of our laws is that we're not to dig into our Mother Earth more than the depth of an arm. So that if we were to dig, that we would just dig to the depth of our arm, and that is it. Because there are spirits, there are elements in the earth that are not meant to come up. That's where they live, and they're meant to stay there. And so when we, on these lands, engage in extractive resource industries and dig into our Mother Earth, down on our ski, we dig into her to extract oil, to mine for all the different elements. When we do that, when we dig in, we are breaking a natural law because we're damaging ecosystems. We're damaging and releasing things that aren't meant to be released. And I know not everybody understands this. I know people will scoff and say, well, we need oil, you guys are sitting on it anyway, you're not using it. I know what our laws are, and there's a reason for them, and they sustain us for millennia. And when you look around the world at climate change, adaptation strategies, mitigation strategies, ways to address it, it always goes back to the natural law of the land. And so we're told specific things on how to behave in the lands that we live in, what people in the Wet'suwet'en territory Their laws are different because they're in a completely different ecosystem than what we are here on the plains. The grasslands and parklands and things like that. So we have a different law, but it always comes from the ecosystem. We have stories and teachings about how to live and how to behave. And everything in how to live a good life is embedded in that. Respecting and honoring our kinship systems. So kinship, you might understand that we have family relations, and that's true. But for us, kinship isn't just our mothers, our fathers, our children, our extended cousins and families. Kinship is who are we related to? If you've ever heard the term all my relations, all of creation. So that includes the water, that includes the soil, that includes all the four-legged animals, the water creatures. That includes all of creation, that we are in relationship with that. And that we need to understand who we are and live in the right way to be in kinship. And so when we have things like the tar sands up in northern Alberta, and the Baptist region there, and the people there, we have people that live on the land that can't eat the foods that we were gifted. I do a lot of work in Indigenous food sovereignty, and we were gifted foods. We have stories around foods, how the animals took pity on us and gave themselves to us, to clothe us and to feed us. And that's a relationship. They want us to hunt them. They want us to gather. They want us to do that. We need to be in relationship with them, but in a certain way, not to mass produce, not to mass kill or mass slaughter, taking more than what we need. There are these natural laws. And so when we go into these lodges, we're being told of hard times to come. We're being told of what's going on in the world. And we're saying it, and we're being told natural laws have been broken. These are not supposed to happen. So potash mine, any kind of mine, I don't know about potash industry in particular, but any kind of extractive industry like that that digs into our Mother Earth is a breaking of natural law. And what we're seeing in our point of view is the consequences of that. So we're being told in the lodges by the grandmothers and grandfathers that our Mother Earth is cleansing herself. That she doesn't need us to live, we need her. We need her. And there's going to be a response. There's a whole cause and effect. And we know that from our protocols. Everything is interconnected. And so you can't do one thing without affecting a myriad of other elements, not just one other thing, everything. And so we go into these lodges and we have these special lodges. I'm not going to go into the details of those because this is information that needs to be earned and there's a protocol around that. But I'll tell you enough so that you can understand where I'm coming from. But a lot of our ceremonies and lodges, these are portals. These are portals to the spirit world. And I'm just making this up. We have a direct connection to that, and they speak to us, and not just in our minds. It's a real, the experiences that we have are extremely profound. I have no doubt, because these aren't just beliefs. These are real experiences. And they're telling us, they're coming in and they're saying, they're warning us in our lodges of difficult times to come. And they say it's important that we prepare and that we remember our teachings. And so what do they mean by preparing? I could spend the whole hour on what is climate change and the whole perspective, but I think you get my point, is that the way we view it as Indigenous peoples is that around the world, but I'm only speaking about our territories here, that there is a natural law, and that has been broken, and there are consequences for that. We have really deep teachings, really deep protocols of how we're to live, and that's been broken. So we're told to prepare. So what does that look like? What does it mean to prepare? So how I'm understanding this is that we have to understand who we are in relation to all our relations and all of creation. And I know that's repetitive. Who are we in relation to all our relations and all of creation? That means that we have a relationship with every living thing. Every living thing is our brother, our sister, our relative. So when you hear an Indigenous person say all my relations, they don't just mean all of you. They do mean all of you. They mean you and everything else. The animals, the air, the water, all of life on earth that sustains us. So it's about living in kinship, remembering our relationship and honoring our kinship systems. That we must remember who we are and how to live in balance like that. And I don't mean some kind of like airy-fairy idea of balance. There are real strict protocols around how to behave and what is allowed around the seasons, around the timing, when to pick medicines, when to gather foods, when to hunt certain animals. Understanding their birth cycles, understanding when they need to be left alone and when is the time to pick them, when it comes to medicines or animals. There's a natural law, there's guidelines for every single thing that we do. So we have to understand our kinship systems and be responsible for that, but we also need to understand our responsibilities to the land, to the water, to our relatives in the spirit world. And people will often talk, you'll hear people say Indigenous rights. What are our rights? And we do have rights, but more importantly, we have responsibilities that we need to uphold. And that's what we're doing our best to do within the confines of Canadian law that goes against our natural law. So we have responsibilities to look after the land, to the water, to our relatives in the spirit world, to live in the way that we were instructed to live. And if we don't, there are consequences to that. And this isn't like a vengeful law that's to get, this is a real consequence and a real result of breaking that. So we have these ancient covenants that have to be respected and upheld. And so I mentioned we have stories about the animals, how they gave themselves to us. But if we were to break that law and overtake and not respect them, they would remove themselves from us as well. So there could be starvation, there could be other elements of repercussions. But we're being reminded of that right now. Right now, we're all being reminded of that. So how do we prepare? We must also deepen our relationship to our Mother Earth. Because how are we going to love something or save something that we don't even know and have a relationship with? So many of us are living in cities and on concrete and in boxes and completely disconnected, except for maybe little patches like lawn that's not even natural or native to this area. How do we deepen that connection? Have you ever gone out? We do things in our ceremonies, in our ways, in our teachings that enable us to do this. We often say we have to humble ourselves. Like I'm up here right now, and this feels very unnatural. And this isn't a criticism. I said, let's do it on stage, and this will be fine. But we also will sit on the ground. We humble ourselves. So we'll do things like we fast 4 days, we'll have food and water to suffer ourselves a little bit. We pray, seek to understand. And humbling yourself, it's just this whole idea of, I'm going to get into it in another slide here, but this idea of humbling ourselves in the face of what's going on, to me, that's important preparing. The other thing is that we must become spiritually strong to face the consequences of what's going to happen, because we're looking at many, many impacts coming down the road. So this is what we're talking about in a lot of Indigenous communities and spiritual communities, or these kinds of things, the breaking of natural law, the consequences of that, being told to prepare. So one of our key teachings, of course, is that everything is interconnected. Everything is related to another part. So all of our actions have an impact on the wildlife. Nobody is exempt from that. No action, no person, no thing. We are part of the ecosystem. And as Indigenous peoples, too, we are part of the natural ecosystem here. We belong to it, and it belongs to us. So when we talk about native species, native plants, as Indigenous peoples, we are native to this area as well, and we have a deep relationship with that. And so just as you would take one element out and it would suffer those things, we are part of that. There's this study, I believe it was in Brady's Sweetgrass that was spoken about in the book. They did this study on the best way to treat sweetgrass. And they said, is it best to pick it out by the root or to cut it? Which is the best way? How will it thrive? So they had three plots or whatever. They had the one that you just picked out by the root, the other that you cut, and one that you didn't pick at all. And they found that it didn't really matter whether you pulled it out by the root or clipped it, that the one that wasn't picked at all suffered the most. It wants to be picked. It wants to be a relationship. Its purpose is to help us. So we need to honor that. So we do have a role. When I say, the earth doesn't need us, we need it, it's true. But we're still in a relationship, and we do have a role to play. So we have to remember that we're part of an ecosystem, not an ecosystem. That's something I saw on Facebook. It's not like I'm going to take credit for that. But it really feels very true when we look at the current paradigm that we're living in that's been imposed upon us as Indigenous peoples and our core ancient teachings. So there's this idea that was introduced to these lands that humans are at the top of the food chain, we have dominion over the earth, that we're here to, gather and take for our own benefit. And it completely violates our teachings. This way of thinking leads to an imbalance in the breaking of natural law. When we forget who we are, when we forget to humble ourselves and understand who we are in relation to the grass, in relation to the soil and the earth, in relation to the sun and moon, all of these things, when we forget that, then that's when we start to break that natural law. We become arrogant, we think more of ourselves than we really are. So we must always consider that. And anytime we make decisions, any kind of decisions in our governance systems, anytime, we always would think several generations ahead. If you've ever heard of the seven generations, we're always thinking ahead. We look back to the generations for their guidance and wisdom, and we look forward and think, how are our actions and decisions today going to impact that? So we're talking about climate change and what needs to be done right now, and people are all worried about how they're going to heat their homes with oil that is a finite resource. How is that thinking about your great-great-grandchildren, your chatbots, those little ones down the road? That's what we need to be making our decisions based on. So we're looking at an Indigenous-led approach to climate change. It's about understanding that it's not just about tweaking it or indigenizing it or putting feather on it or kind of just like taking an idea that's inherently completely different from what we do and just tweaking it a little bit so we, I can never say palatable. You know what I'm trying to say? I struggle with that word. My mom can't say vanilla, I can't say it. So, but I think you know what I'm trying to say. So we always need to keep that in consideration when we're making these decisions. No exceptions. There's never any exception. That is also natural law. So I'm saying that from our perspective, climate change is the result of breaking natural law as a consequence. So what does that mean? So the consequences of breaking natural law, we're seeing things like extreme weather patterns. So in our ceremonies, there is thunder routines. And there's many, many, many of them. And one of the elders that we spent a lot of time with, his grandfather's old man Thunderbird. And we were in a ceremony one time, and he was talking about this. He was telling us about what's been happening, and they're angry, and what's happening, and that this isn't right, and that they're going around and they're cleansing. And we were told to hang out our cloth on the west side of our house, a tornado cloth or a storm cloth, to protect our homes. And I know people think that sounds like superstition or just silly beliefs. But when you go deep down this path and you learn how to live in that way, it is astounding and profound how real this is. It's realer than many other things that we consider real in our world. So anyway, we have these extreme weather patterns, and old man Thunderbird is saying, he's angry, he's coming to cleanse and cleansing. And they're going on, they're saying, we're going to be doing a lot of this. We're going to see more storms, more weather. We're coming and we're cleansing. And they're punishing in a sense. They're saying, this is a break and there's a consequence to that. And they talk about the ones that are not even like this Western view, right? They talk about the ones that came and what's happening on these lands and how it's a breaking of natural laws. And it doesn't matter that it's a different culture, different belief system, that the consequences are of the land. We talk about the law of the land. That doesn't change, no matter who you are. So they're talking about extreme weather patterns, so we'll see that. But for us, when we see the extreme weather patterns, we're not looking at models and projections and based on the past or based on what they think is going to happen. They're coming from these teachings and they're coming from the spirit world and they're telling us this is what's happening before it starts to happen. So we have a lot of prophecies, we have a lot of different ways of knowing. So we're also going to see water. NIMBY, you've heard about Standing Rock, water is life. A lot of the water ceremonies that are going on right now, we have water songs. Water has a spirit. Talk to it, it'll help you, it'll cleanse you. And I encourage you, next time you have water, to just acknowledge it has a spirit, it'll hear you. You can talk to it, it'll help you. It'll keep you healthy. But we're going to start seeing water be impacted quite deeply with areas of drought, areas of floods, the precipitation cycle. So again, we're being told about this in a very spiritual way, but it all lines up. The other thing here, plants and medicine's dying. We rely a lot on different plants that we gather in different areas, that they're not going to be available to us anymore. When we need them the most, but they're not going to be available, unable to grow. We're noticing the natural cycles and migration patterns of animals being affected. We're seeing that. We're seeing things that aren't always the same. Our people are on the land. A lot of people are in the city here too. But the ones of us that are still out on the land, and there's a movement to get back out there. There's this huge resurgence of people coming and teaching, and we're hungry for this knowledge because, of course, it was ripped away from us and stolen very violently. And our spirits ache for that. We're coming back to the land. It remembers us and we remember it, and we're getting back to that. But the ones who grow up on traplands or hunting or whatever, they're noticing these patterns changing. And so we're on the front lines of climate change. We're not sitting in offices going through papers arguing with people about whether it's a hoax or not. We're out on the land and we're seeing the results. Every day, we're seeing it. Massive food shortages. When you look at the global food supply, I mean, I do a lot of work on Indigenous food sovereignty, on our food systems, and how they were rooted in a particular place. We also have extensive trade systems. It's not that we just stay in one place. So we would gather plants and medicines and foods in this area and travel and share in those foods. So we were relying on a local food system, but we did have a trade system as well, you know, in a global or continental. So we had that. And, but it was important not to overextend that. But we're going to see our food supply be deeply affected by that. And animal extinction. We'll see my next slide too, some of the concerns we have about our relatives that are going to be dying off in the next little while if we don't change things. We have prophecies about this time. You may have heard of the 7th and 8th fire prophecies, the eagle and condor, there's the black snake, referring to pipelines. There's a lot of different prophecies that many different Indigenous groups have. Teachings about this time. Teachings about a time when we're going to have to choose. There's going to be a fork in the road. Now, are we going to choose the way of the earth or the way of destruction? And we're even being told, we're told too that in our lodges, that our own people would turn against us. One of our elders had this vision. We were being chased and we were hiding behind a hill and they were coming to the last little bits of our land. And it was our own people coming for us. Because our people have been forced into poverty on these lands, in our own homelands, we've been forced into poverty. And so these companies come and say, we're going to build this pipeline anyway, you want some money or no? Sometimes it can be a bit more complicated, but essentially it's boiling down to that. We're living in poverty, we have extreme issues happening. And so I don't have ill feelings towards our chiefs that are signing on and continuing the breaking of this natural law, going down a path that we were warned against. So we do have prophecies and stories about this time. So this came from Harvard University, from the Biodiversity and Health Department, saying that climate change alone is expected to threaten with extinction approximately 1/4 or more of all species on land by the year 2050. Surpassing even habitat loss is the biggest threat to life on land. Species in the oceans and in fresh water are also at great risk from climate change. That's in 30 years. So when I think of all our relations, when I think about all of our relatives that are being threatened, we're all being threatened by this. But I do some other presentations on how climate change is expected to impact our food systems. And this is the one slide that always gets me very, very sad, right? When we look at the birds, the plants, the fish, the mammals, invertebrates, the reptiles, and amphibians, and which groups are most at risk and where. And just looking at how our teachings and our prophecies and what we're being told in the lodges, how they're lining up with what we're reading in the news, with the scientific way of looking at things, with the political way of looking at things. It lines up. It's just a different way of looking at things. And the reason I'm sharing this is because we need a different way of looking at things. You've heard, I don't know who said it, but you're not going to change a problem with the same thinking that got you into it. So this is a mindset, a worldview issue. This is a spiritual issue. This is an issue that's going to require us to have an approach unlike anything we've ever seen before. And we're not going to fix it or address it by doing the same things that we've done or insisting on the same paradigms that we've been living by for many years. So one thing that's going to be required as this happens is that we're going to have to adapt to a changing environment. And as Indigenous peoples, we've always been able to adapt to our natural environment because it's embedded in our teachings. We're told how to live, and there are changes that happen. And it wasn't like there was never a static environment. People said, oh, things have always changed. Yeah, they've always changed. They have always changed and evolved. But it's different when you're changing because of a natural rhythm and cycle, and different when you're looking at a violation of the ecosystems and the killing off of life and the greed and all of these things. So anyway, adapting to a changing environment. As Indigenous peoples, this is getting more difficult to do because we're living in a world that is less and less natural every day, that looks less and less like the world that we were gifted and taught how to live in. So as Indigenous peoples, we are living in a post-apocalyptic Indigenous world. Just think about that. When you think about the apocalypse, our ecosystems, our lands, everything was intact. Our kinship systems were so extensive and beautiful. What we've been through in the last 100 years on these lands, I know people say 500 years, but when we're talking here about these lands, it wasn't 500 years, it started over there 500 years ago, obviously. Came out here, probably about 100 years. So people like to say, oh, my grandparents or great-grandparents came here. And that's when, our genocide, but our life as we knew it, this beautiful life was, so we're living in a time where we've already experienced what we refer to as an apocalypse. We've already experienced this great loss that we're talking about, climate change is going to come change everything and mess everything up. And we've experienced that. We've experienced a genocide. None of this cultural genocide stuff. Let's just be real. We have to have real conversations. So our people were purposely killed off, starved off, stolen off, pushed off, and we continue to this day to be treated like that because we were in the way of the project of Canada. There was a Buffalo Nation genocide. Regina, you know the Cree word for Regina? Oskanakasastegi. It's a pile of bones. See those pictures of those bones? Go to the Iowa Museum and we'll try over there. Big, huge photos of very proud people standing on all of these buffalo skulls. He's seen that pale. He's seen that pale. He gave us so much. And my husband's on part of a committee or a group that's looking to manage bison herds with the Nature Conservancy of Canada. The man on his back, and we had a gathering recently to talk about how they're going to manage these herds with an Indigenous perspective. We got talking, I wasn't part of that, but I talked to my husband about this a lot. We got talking about the buffalo. What does the buffalo mean to us? And everybody was, we don't think about that. My husband's a hunter. I eat a lot of elk, moose, deer, rabbits, ducks, geese. A lot of these foods that come from the land, they're not buffalo. That's a farm. But that was a genocide committed against our relatives. These are our relatives. And so we're living with the results of that. Why am I bringing up the buffalo genocide? We're talking about climate change. Because if you look around the natural prairie habitat that's left around these parks, people used to say it was about 20% natural grasslands and native prairie. But just last week they were talking, I believe, at the Nature Saskatchewan gathering and saying it could be as low as 80%. Meaning that about 92%, so anywhere between 80 to 92% of this land has been converted or broken or used up in some other way than maintaining a natural habitat. So when we talk about grasslands and carbon sequestration, that plays a role. So the Buffalo Nation helped you when we're talking about the natural prairie. I'm just bringing this up because these things just didn't happen overnight. There's a whole mindset of how we gather things on the land for our own benefit or for the benefit of all in web of life. And that's really important to consider. And our languages come from the land. They were recently talking about how there's a direct correlation between the loss of natural habitat and intact ecosystems and the loss of language around the world with Indigenous languages. And we're finding that to be true. What little we have left, this 8%, continues to be forcefully taken. When the treaties were signed and everything, like, okay, well, here's land set aside for the use of Indians. That was a legal term. I think it's still a legal term in Indian and all that. But whether it's farmland for agricultural use, or gold mining, or potash mining, or oil and gas, or water, it's just a matter of time. And as Indigenous peoples, we know that. We know it's just a matter of time before whatever resources are left of our lands will be under threat. And so we're having to deal with this right now. So climate change poses threats and dangers to the survival of Indigenous communities worldwide, even though we contribute the least to greenhouse gas emissions as a group and as a culture. In fact, Indigenous peoples are vital to the many ecosystems in their lands and territories and help enhance the resilience of these ecosystems. In addition, Indigenous peoples interpret and react to the impacts of climate change in creative ways, drawing on traditional knowledge and other technologies to find solutions that society at large can replicate to counter any changes. So, often people want to talk about Indigenous solutions to climate change. Oh, this totally, there we go. So if you look at Indigenous peoples around the world globally, we make up about 5% of the population. We have 5,000 distinct groups in 90 countries that have been established around us. 22% of the land surface around the globe are considered indigenous lands. And we protect 80% of global biodiversity around the world. So, source for this information down there. So why are Indigenous peoples' rights and responsibilities and teachings vital to addressing these issues of climate change? I just set, a bit of a foundation to talk about our spiritual approach. And it may be something you haven't heard before, but again, I just want to reiterate that the challenges coming towards us are going to require a different way of looking at things. It's going to require a mindset shift and spiritual shift as well. So 80% of global biodiversity, we need to protect whatever is left. 85% of the world's protected and conserved conservation areas. So there's this big move right now. I did some work for the Nature Conservancy of Canada, writing articles for their magazine. And there's this push towards Indigenous protected, there's a term for it, I can't remember off the top of my head, but Indigenous protected and conserved areas. They're finding a lot of success. So there are some partnerships that are happening between, say, the Nature Conservancy of Canada and Indigenous groups on protecting some of what's left, which is going to be really vital in the coming years. So I want to talk a little bit about this idea of Indigenous solutions to climate change. So I always find this really interesting because, of course, I'm part of an organization that is about developing Indigenous-led solutions to climate change. But the ironic thing about that is that if we live by an Indigenous worldview, we wouldn't have climate change. We wouldn't have broken those natural laws that have led to the experiences we're seeing today. So it's like, how, as Indigenous peoples, do we come up with a solution that was not created by our own culture and history and ways? But we're here, we have to. And I also believe that it's not just that it needs to be rooted in this different worldview, but that we all need to come together, that we all need to share our different ideas, worldviews, and perspectives. So this crisis is going to require a vast amount of imagination and creativity. This world and the people in this world are really amazing. I know my background. My mom on my mom's side, she's Soto from the local First Nation, so I'm a Soto woman. On my dad's side, English and Swiss. So my family history is made up of both the colonized and the colonizers. So I have ancestors from England. So my ancestors came here too. So I just want you to know that when I'm speaking about this, that I have connections to both these sides. I'm not just rooted on one side or the other. And I always find it really interesting about our cultures coming together, because I think we had a vast opportunity to create something completely amazing about meshing these two worldviews together. Because I look at the inventions and the scientific knowledge and the technological advances of Western civilization and ideas, and I find this profound and astounding, and I respect it. But imagine if we had done that and also respected the natural laws and that creativity of what we really could have created. So I often think about how the world could have been, but this is where we are now. So it's going to require a vast amount of imagination and ingenuity, something that I didn't coin, but this is, I believe, Dr. David Wildcat from down in the US, indigenuity. Indigenuity, so really looking at new ways of living in a modern world and addressing modern problems in a way that is still rooted in our Indigenous teachings. So for example, what's really interesting is, I know a lot of people think the teepee is like primitive, rudimentary, just kind of, why would we live in these structures? Why didn't we have houses? Well, we must have been so uncivilized. I don't even remember, last year, a couple years ago at the First Nations University, there was some big windstorm, I don't know if it was plow winds or what was happening, but all of these other tents and structures and everything had blown down. Or maybe it was at Treaty 4 out in the valley. There was some place anyway where all of these structures were damaged and knocked over and whatnot, and those teepees were still standing. And if you look at that, if you look at how it's a cone and how the wind works, and these structures are meant for prairie life. They're meant for traveling because, of course, we have vast herds of animals and buffalo that would come through, floods and other things. So we had to have structures that made sense for where we live, and that made sense for this area. If you look down south in areas where they have tornadoes, so this is where this Dr. Wildcat talked about indigenuity, that they had these more kind of dome, like homes made out of like black stuff. They were domes, but they live in Tornado Alley. So the tornadoes come, they just go and then tornadoes, blow the house to smithereens. They just go over it. And that's working and living within your natural ecosystem and understanding the elements that you live in and living in a way that is going to preserve life and live a good life and not damage things. And right now we're having this cookie cutter, everything is one size fits all. So when you think about Indigenous solutions to climate change, they're going to be rooted in places. We're not going to have a solution for all of Canada to meet its climate change targets or emissions reduction targets and things like that. What's going to work for the Treaty 4 area, this territory, compared to up in northern Saskatchewan? These are different ecosystems. So we can't just have a made in Saskatchewan solution. They're going to be different based on what the land needs and provides. So it's also going to be different for different regions throughout, what's called BC and Manitoba and all these other areas. So the land, the solution's going to be rooted in those areas. Each has its own balance. So we also need to respect and restore where possible any natural ecosystems and protect biodiversity because they're going to hold the answers for us. When you look at how the animals, the bugs, and all parts of creation live, they're going to give us our solutions. Because that's what we're taught. We go and spend time out in the bush. We fast. We go out and we sit there. And we learn, and we learn, and we learn. And so it will provide those answers for us. Because there's going to be a rebalancing. There's going to have to be a rebalancing. The other things that are more, practical and, kind of easily digestible for people living in approved structures right now. We're looking at things like Indigenous sovereignty, UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and treaty agreements. So I'm going to focus on these three. I think the first part, or what I really wanted to get across today, because an Indigenous-led solution to climate change isn't just taking regular solutions to climate change and making them nice for Indigenous peoples or putting some symbolism on it or just saying a prayer or a land acknowledgement. It's really a shift in consciousness. It's a completely different way of looking at the world. And that doesn't happen in the mind. That happens in our heart, our spirit. It happens when you get out on the land. It's not going to happen in a classroom. It's not going to happen in a lecture where someone tells you about these things. It's going to happen when you're out on the land and having these relationships and having these teachings come to you. I can't further describe it. You have to experience it. But that's where our answers are now. So I want to talk a bit about Indigenous sovereignty because it's really big right now. There's a lot of people who are really mad about people holding up the trains and holding up the economy and being an inconvenient Indian, and people are pretty pissed off about that. But it's a necessary thing, it really is. So Indigenous sovereignty is the law of the land. I've heard a lot in the comment section of people saying, the law of the land, the rule of law. We do have a law of the land, and that's what we are upholding. That's what we are standing up for. We are not breaking the law. We are standing by our natural, inherent laws of this land. We are protecting what's left of our lands and territories, and we are literally putting our lives on the line. This is not me being dramatic or exaggerating. Read those comments, the threats. Shoot an Indian Day. Let's just mow them down. Drive cars through them. There was a car down over on Albert Street when there was a protest recently. Just drove through. We're putting our lives on the line. I went down to Standing Rock in December of 2016, just after their American Thanksgiving. And the courage, and the conviction, and the love of the land, the water, these people. We're not doing this because we don't have anything better to do. We're doing this for our children. We're doing this for our lives. If you think of anything, if you think of your children, and if anyone came and stole them from you by law, beat them for speaking English, strip them of everything they know, for generations and generations, came and took your house, put you in a little corner in the backyard, and continue to threaten you. This is what we're experiencing in our own homelands. We have no place else to go, and we have laws and protocols that we were given that we need to stand up and protect. So we're putting our lives on the line. So this is the part where you guys might get a little upset. But whatever, we've been fighting for years. Canada is an illegitimate state. It is an illegitimate state. This is a hostile occupation on these lands. How can I say that? Didn't we have a treaty agreements between Indigenous nations and the Crown? And we did have agreements. And we were told to, again, this goes back to our teachings, this is what I'm speaking from this point of view, is that when we're signing a treaty, of course we do ceremony, everything's around ceremony. We consult with the grandfathers and grandmothers on everything. It's the way we live. And it's how do you live a good life? You know, promise with. How do you live a good life? You live according to those teachings. We were told what was going to happen. Again, we have prophecies. These are things that we knew of. But we signed anyway because it was kind of, there was really no choice in the matter, but the grandfathers said, don't worry, we're going to look after you. But there's a book, is that Seed and Surrender? Land Surrender? I don't know. Anyway, but there was a seed and surrender clause that was added after they were signed. So these lands were never, ever, ever ceded. We agreed to share, we agreed to live together, we did not agree to give everything up and be put on small parcels of land. We did not agree to the Indian Act. And by the way, the Indian Act was passed in 1876. Sorry, 1876. That was also the year Treaty 6 was signed. So as Treaty 6 is being negotiated, the Indian Act is already being implemented. It wasn't called the Indian Act at that time. It was a gradual civilization or enfranchisement act or whatever. But the goal has always been to erase what's called the Indian problem, to get rid of us. To open up the lands for settlement and resource extraction. That's always been the end game. So the seed and surrender clauses were illegally added to treaty agreements after they were signed. The ultimate goal has always been to gather all the resources from all the lands that we're on. We weren't expected to live. We were the vanishing Indian and all of these things. You know, now our populations are growing. I mean, it has really become this big issue now. I'm not going to go really deep into this. I'm happy to talk to you about it if you want to have a conversation afterwards. Because again, I could get really deep into this. And being confrontational isn't really my thing. If my husband were up here, he'd be saying, he's a lot stronger and harsher and heavier than I do, but we're different in our approach. But I want to bring that up because Indigenous sovereignty, that we're standing up for our homelands and territories, that we had never surrendered, we had never ceded, that we have a right to live on by the natural laws of the land that were bestowed upon us. And if anyone is interested in addressing climate change issues and impacts in this current climate that we're living in, Canadians can support Indigenous sovereignty to help mitigate the worst of climate change impacts. So if you're looking at stopping certain developments from going forward, Indigenous sovereignty and standing behind us is one way that you can do that. So I wanted to share with you the spiritual approach that we take to what is climate change, what are we seeing in the world, why is this important to understand and consider, because it's going to require a new way of thinking, a new way of living. Like everything is going to have to change. Like we're not going to be able to tweak this system. You might disagree with me, and that is fine. That's fine. Everyone's disagreeing on climate change and everything anyway. So, but I just don't. We're not going to be able to tweak this current system that we're in and keep living the way that we're going to live and just have some kind of magic thing. Like every single thing is going to have to change. And as Indigenous peoples, we've gone through a major change of every single thing. We've been through it. And so we can go through that. And, you know, and we can do it by choice and kind of like band together and rise to the challenge, or it can be pushed and forced upon us. Anyway, so Indigenous sovereignty is a long thing to learn about, but I really encourage you to learn more about that. And Canada's true history when it comes to Indigenous peoples, the lands. There's a treaty map here. If you look at the treaty map, I'll have it on a different slide in a different presentation. It doesn't cover all of what's considered Canadian land, so it didn't go all the way to say what's called BC. And yes, there's modern day treaties and that kind of thing. But these lands were taken, and you look at things like the railroad and how our food and the buffaloes were slaughtered, and how that was used against us to clear us from the land. You know, there's a whole history there that I'm not going to get into tonight, but why do you need to learn about Canadian and Indigenous history to understand climate change? But you do, we all do. Like, again, it's going to require, and I know climate change is happening around the world, so how is this going to apply to other areas? But I'm going to talk about colonization a little bit, and globalization very, very briefly. I do want to talk here about the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, referred to as UNDRIP. So it's a UN declaration on the rights of Indigenous peoples. It's become a platform for our people to demand recognition of our fundamental human and unique rights as individuals, or as Indigenous peoples, sorry. So what makes it really unique is that it was developed in collaboration with Indigenous peoples and nations over a period of 20 years, as well as with other nation states, UN agencies, and NGOs. So often a lot of policies that involve Indigenous peoples don't have our involvement or our participation, but this really did, and Indigenous peoples collectively shaped this document. So it requires, or it represents the bare minimum standards. The bare minimum, okay? Like, we don't even have clean drinking water in most of our communities, so like bare minimum is a pretty like sweet deal for us these days. So the bare minimum standards for survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous peoples. It's rooted in self-determination and demands that the state adopt standards of free, prior, and informed consent. So I would encourage all of you who are curious about what's happening across the country and why Indigenous peoples are rising up and standing in the way, making a big mess of the economy, getting in the way of trains and everybody's convenience. I would look into this idea of free, prior, and informed consent when it comes to any development on our lands. UNDRIP was adopted by 148 countries when it was first introduced. Canada was originally opposed to the declaration and then later endorsed it in 2010. So in 2016, the Trudeau administration, under that administration, Canada had made commitments to implement it, but it has yet to be seen. And in fact, that's another conversation. But many of the promises, this whole idea of reconciliation is dead, done, was never a thing. A lot of us are like, thank goodness, because it was kind of a big lie. Because what really is reconciliation? Land back, natural habitats restored. And I don't think Canadians are anywhere ready to have that conversation and really deal with that. So self-determination and UNDRIP. So if you look at Article 19 and Article 32.2, talks about these things. So I'm not going to go through it anyway on time, but Article 19 again talks about free, prior, and informed consent. So that doesn't mean, oh, we're going to consult with Indigenous peoples, check this box, and do it anyway. It has to be free consent, meaning we can't just be under the threat of poverty and bad drinking water and everything else going even worse than things already are. It has to be free. We have to be in a position where we can make that decision. It has to happen prior to any decisions. It has to be informed. It can't be rushed. We can't, there's so many cases I can go into, but I'm not going to. So that's really important under UNDRIP. Article 32 states too, that prior to the approval of any project, so states have to consult and cooperate in good faith with Indigenous peoples' concerns through their own representative institutions in order to obtain a free, prior, and informed consent prior to the approval of any project affecting their lands or territories and other resources, particularly in connection with the development, utilization, or exploitation of mineral, water, or other resources. So Canada signed on to this, and it's not doing that. And this is why people miss. Many reasons. But this is it. This is what we have. That's all we have left. We've lost so much. We've lost so much. We have 8% of natural habitat left in these territories. We've lost our buffalo relatives. We've lost our children. We've lost our languages. And we didn't lose them like we misplaced keys. These were violently stolen from us. So we just remind you of that as well when we say we lost it. We didn't lose anything when we were careless. It was violently taken from us so that this country could be built and requires all of those natural resources in order to continue with it. So when we look at this, how is this important and how does this relate to climate change? So if we're looking at the drivers behind climate change and the things that keep contributing to greenhouse gas emissions being emitted and waters being polluted and all these other things, if there are people, we were marching in the streets, we're doing all these other things, writing to MLAs and MPs and city representatives, but if people got behind Indigenous rights and sovereignty, we have the best legal leg to stand on to stop corporations, governments from coming into our lands and territories. So if you're a rural farm owner, or like if you live in a rural area or you live in the city, if you have concerns about these projects and how are we going to stop them, and our Canadian representatives aren't doing anything about it, come stand with us. I mean, we've been dealing with this for many years, and we're still here, and our populations are growing, and we're figuring something out. And we managed to get this passed. So Indigenous Climate Action is the organization that I'm representing here.
There are things happening on the land that are very disturbing.
Some of our lakes have become unswimmable. Some of our well water has become undrinkable.
Elders can't predict a lot of the weather patterns or what is known in our traditional ecological knowledge.
It's affecting the maple, it affects the trees, some of the birds are not even flying south anymore.
The medicines that we used to be able to find, we can't find them anymore.
We know that the animals are going to suffer. And if the animals suffer and the land suffers, we're going to suffer.
Communities are slipping into the ocean in the Arctic, or their houses are literally sinking into the permafrost. And it feels like the only people that are like being like, whoa, 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 what are you doing? Have been Indigenous communities calling for an end to these things. Transition needs to happen now. We need to stop doing what we've been doing and begin something new. That's where this idea of Indigenous climate action has really come from. This idea that Indigenous peoples aren't just the first to be impacted, but can be the first people to provide solutions that are grounded in more than just economic solutions.
Canada and its whole system, its whole economic paradigm is fundamentally out of sync with what real, tangible action on climate looks like.
What I see from grassroots movements like ICA, Idle No More, they're putting together plans that are ambitious and something that actually reflects the type of knowledges that we're talking about all the time when we talk about Indigenous knowledge.
We are our own experts. We don't have to translate ourselves all the time through the lens of the mainstream.
We want to work towards a recognition of our fundamental role as the leaders in this discussion.
Because we can't just be addressing climate from a science perspective. We have to be addressing it from a human rights perspective and an Indigenous rights perspective. Indigenous climate actions and other Indigenous-led initiatives and mobilizations are going to be critical to making that happen in the most effective way.
So basically, Indigenous Climate Action, what we are, we're an Indigenous-led climate change initiative. I mentioned that we're national. We're the only climate justice organization in Canada, and it doesn't belong to any one individual or a collective. So I'm part of it, but it's all volunteer. We work together. Some of the projects that we do, so we're made up of people from right across different territories. So you can meet, our people. So Ariel Durante is our executive director. We've got Melina which she's done a lot of work for us. And some of these people have. So here we've got everybody here on the team. So that's our core team. And some of the things that we're doing right now are we're having gatherings across Canada. We amplify voices of different, particularly Indigenous youth that are really at the forefront of the work that we're doing. So we want to lift up their stories. We're also producing resources. So I mentioned that our communities are really strapped and we're in a lot of survival mode right now. So climate change adaptation policies are not always on the radar of all Indigenous communities because we're dealing with poverty and substance abuse and suicide epidemics and drinking water and all sorts of things. Our leaders are spread thin and we're really struggling. And so what we're looking to do is provide resources that are a basic toolkit that every community can then tweak and adapt for their own ecosystem, for their own community, and what's going to work for them. And we support Indigenous sovereignty. And so we'll have different projects as well that we do. So we've got resources here. There was a whole campaign on Reject Tech. And ended up being quite successful. So there's many, many ways to get involved. So if there's any interest in anybody to support Indigenous Climate Action as an organization or as a principle, there's many resources. And it's not all, going to rallies and things like that, although that is very helpful. There's many ways. So indigenousclimateaction.com. I'm not going to go to the whole website, but I would encourage you to go and check it out. All of our resources are there. You can find out what we're doing, the projects we're embarking on. It's a small core group, but we're really lifting up these voices, talking about these ideas. So I really encourage you to go deeper into that. I'm going to kind of start wrapping things up here. Yeah, so this is who we are and what we do. All right, oh, and how you can support, honestly, so what can you do to help? So I kind of gave all this background on our spiritual approach to climate change, how we're on the land, how we're seeing all the changes impacting the migration patterns of our animals, of our food systems, of the waterways, everything, how we're contributing the least to climate change, but we're being impacted the first and the most by it. And that's not just Indigenous peoples here, if you look globally, especially at island states, there's a lot of impacts being felt first and foremost. Affluent people in North America are going to feel the effects probably the last and the least. So it is vital that you use your power privilege to make changes now because the rest of the world is really going to need that. So one way you can help is donate money on a regular basis to Indigenous Climate Action. We have 4 staff, 5 now. But every year the funding is up in the air. So we've got a funding coordinator that works on that. Participate in our calls to action and donate to specific causes. Sometimes we have specific call outs that you can support. Attending marches, rallies, frontline gatherings in support of Indigenous sovereignty and climate action. We need everybody. But we particularly need, this is kind of the optics thing we were talking about the other day, my husband and I, about like, people are used to seeing Indigenous peoples on the front lines and it's not really, like, oh yeah, there they are protesting again. And even the language, we're not protesting, we're protecting what's left of our lands and our families and our way of life. So it's always, I was a reporter for many years. I understand that whole element as well. Or you've got kind of the environmentalists or people that are dismissed as hippies or activists, they don't get a lot of attention. But when you have professional people, professional white people in particular, standing up and coming out and doing these things in suits and in mainstream and really coming out to support, that gets attention. And that's part of privilege. And so we really require people who really care about that to come out and support us. And we need some protection, like our lives are being threatened literally. And so the more people we have to come and stand with us, the safer we'll be. And it's really important. Educate yourself on true Canadian history. I know I made some strong statements. I may have angered some or many of you. But really just take a look. If I triggered something there, go and see, why am I talking like this? Why am I saying these things? Like, just go and research. And there's no excuse for it. Get a library card, take some books out, get on the internet. Like, you're talking about free education, right? Like, people say that we have free education, but I'm noticing that as Indigenous people, we're educating you freely on a lot of Indigenous issues in Canadian history. So just consider that. Write letters, call your MPs and MLAs, councillors, or representatives, and you know that already, but do it, and then tell them you expect Indigenous sovereignty to be respected and upheld. So this whole drinking water thing across Canada, as an example, I don't hear regular Canadians getting on their phone demanding from their MP, why the heck have you not addressed this issue yet? Why is it taking 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Why? I bet if most regular Canadians go out on the phone every day and are outraged, as you should be, by the lack of drinking water in Canada, in Indigenous communities, something might happen. Because our lives aren't valued, and we're in the way, and nobody really cares. So that is a way that you can help. It is helping to assert Indigenous sovereignty. It's helping to support these causes. Let's use UNDRIP. Let's use the treaty rights. Let's use Indigenous sovereignty. If we want to address climate change and really make big changes on this huge issue, this is one way that we can really do it from a legal standpoint as well. The other thing I would really, really encourage you to do, really looking deep in your heart, develop a deeper understanding. So the fact is, when it comes to these Indigenous issues, and it's deeply rooted in climate change, most Canadians are somewhere between unaware, don't care, or actively pushing further assimilation. And I would invite you to consider where you're at. Unaware, don't care as long as it's not too inconvenient. Pushing further assimilation, we see a lot of that. So this is the other thing. Individuals in positions of power and privilege have a responsibility to dismantle the systems of oppression and colonization that were built by their grandparents, parents, great-grandparents, and all their successive governments. So I often hear, well, I didn't create those policies. Well, I didn't come and take the land, and I didn't do that. And no, you didn't. I didn't get taken to residential school, but my mom did, and I'm living with the results of being raised by somebody who was raised in one of those places. Let me tell you, as Indigenous communities, we're dealing with a lot of shit. And we're overcoming a lot of stuff that has been done to us. We're living with the results every day. No, you didn't do it, but your successive governments did. And there is a responsibility to speak up and do that. We're doing the work on the ground in our communities to overcome so much of what's been done. And how is this related to climate change? It is directly related to climate change, because if you look at the drivers behind climate change and what is increasing greenhouse gas emissions, it is the extraction of all of these resources that have come from Indigenous land, that have been plundered or been pushed out of the way, so it is related. Again, going back to one of the core tenets is that everything is interconnected in this web of life. So it's definitely important that when we're looking at addressing climate change, that we examine the history of Canada and what we can do to dismantle these systems that are contributing to the further warming of this planet. Or if you prefer, which I do, the consequences of breaking natural law. So this is the trickiest one. Let's examine white supremacy, white privilege, and white fragility. There are resources out there. Google those ones, take a look. If you're angry at me, that's okay. But just go and read into it. It's really, really important. I talk about white fragility with my father. Like, we have these conversations all the time. Despite English doesn't get this, so I'm doing this work all the time. And this final one is the key. The biggest one, I should highlight it. Understand the role of colonization in creating the climate crisis. Not just in Canada, but around the world. But for people here, I would say particularly in Canada, understanding what colonization is and how that's addressing or contributing to all these issues we're seeing. So decolonization, because we're right now, decolonization is about the return of and connections to land. So we take our teachings from the land, our language from the land, everything comes from the land. It's the land that's going to give us the solutions to climate. To the climate crisis, to everything that we're experiencing. It's not all going to be just go on about those things. It's really about getting back. Again, what I said at the beginning, we need to humble ourselves. We need to humble ourselves, look to the land, look to the ecosystems for answers and guidance and direction. So finally, I would just encourage you to have the hard, challenging, triggering conversations. Again, climate change, we're not going to get through this easily. It's going to be hard and messy. And as Indigenous peoples, we're used to hard, messy, and ugly. It's been what's characterized the last 100 years in our territories and homelands. So, we're used to it. We can do this. But I think you guys have had it pretty comfy. Not to say you didn't have a hard life, okay? Don't say, we grew up already too. I get that. I'm talking about collectively speaking, okay? So just take a look at that. Have these triggering conversations, because when we come to address this global crisis, again, it's not going to be tweaking our current system. We're going to have to overhaul everything. And that means overhauling ourselves. This is a spiritual crisis as well. It's not just an economic crisis or a scientific crisis. There's so much. Speak out against racism. As Indigenous peoples, we are putting our lives on the front line every day. And that doesn't mean just going to direct actions. That also just means going out and about, because as these blockades continue to happen and as Canadians get more and more angry, our lives are at risk. We walk down the street, I walk around in a skirt like this, and people's anger at those things get directed at me. So this is happening. So speak out, not just when other Indigenous people are around either. Like, speak out to your coworker, speak out to your friends, speak out to the person who leaves that comment. And please, 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 put courage before comfort. I don't care about your comfort. I don't care that it's uncomfortable to talk and confront people about their racist attitudes, or to look at the history of Canada, or to look at yourself. Your comfort is killing us. It's killing us. It's killing the land. It's killing the animals. Get out of your comfort zones. Get out of your bubbles. And come and stand with us. So courage over comfort. Come and stand with us. We laugh. We have fun. We're out on those lines. These ceremonies, they keep us strong. They keep us hopeful. There's a reason we're still here. There's a reason we laugh. There's a reason when you go to these painful communities that have endured so much, the thing you'll notice the most is that we're always telling jokes and we're always laughing. And you know why? Because we know who we are. Because we're rooted in the land and we're rooted in these ceremonies. And we get a strength. We don't walk this road alone. And we may not be spiritual or religious, and that's okay. We are. I am. And I know where my strength comes from, our people's strength, and it comes from that. And that strength is what's going to help us get through this challenge, help us address this crisis. What it's going to require is for regular mainstream Western thinkers around the globe over, not just here in Canada, to just take that off. Take it off for a little bit and open up your spirits and your heart to this different way of thinking. Stop poo-pooing it as primitive. Because it's not primitive. It's our future. It's our way forward. We knew how to live. And we had all sorts of, look at all sorts of technological advancements that we've had. Look at red alerts. We talk about indigenuity and how our systems were very scientific, and you can see the different models. All the answers are there, so just come and open your minds and spirits. And finally be hopeful, because it's dire, it's hard, but we know what it's like to lose everything that's important to you. To lose your entire way of life and have something else in its place. And you guys are looking at the same thing. We're looking at having to overhaul everything, and it's scary. We don't know what it's going to look like, but we know what that feels like. And come and stand with us, because we signed treaties in good faith, and we did have teachings to welcome and to share our knowledge of medicine, so we all didn't die from scurvy. So we're still here. We're still doing this. There's anger out there. Some people get really mad. There's a reason that I share that my dad is white, English Swiss, my mom is Soto, because I believe we came together for a reason. I don't believe that you weren't supposed to come here. You were, and we're glad of it. You have so much to share with us, so many cool advancements, things that have made our lives better. We also brought a lot of other things. We have something to share. If you would have just listened to us and share and be open to the knowledge, we would have created something even better. And we can still do that. And I think that's what this is. This is the culmination of years of a misguided approach. And so it's an opportunity for us to open up and be in kinship with one another and to create a real community. Because this divisiveness is going to continue until we decide to stop. And really it's up to you. The people holding the power and privilege have the ability to make that decision. So Indigenous-led climate change actions, Indigenous-led, come and stand with us. It's really about you. You're going to open your hearts and come and stand with us, and I really hope you do. We're seeing the consequences of what's happened, and we have some answers. But you have to just come and sit with us as equals, as our partners, not as paternalistic, we know better and help you guys out. So come and sit with us. Thank you for your time today. I appreciate it. I had a really giant soapbox here today. Stood all over it.
So we've got two microphones. Sarah's got one at the back, and I've got one up here. And just a reminder that the lecture is being filmed. So if you ask a question, the voice will be part of the presentation, but the camera won't be on you. This is really great presentation, great talk, lots to think about. Thank you very much, Michelle. So now is our time for sharing some reflections. And Terry, go to you first.
Thank you, Michelle. You've spoken to Justin.
I have not. I'm not sure you would like that to say. I would speak to him.
Why not?
Well, I think his actions speak for himself, right? Like, this is the thing. I gotta tell you, okay, I'll talk a little bit about Justin Trudeau. So when he was first elected, I couldn't tell you how happy I was. I was hopeful. I was a journalist in my first career and followed politics, and we've always gotten the bitter end of the deal. Justin Trudeau comes out and he's talking reconciliation. He's using language I have never heard a Canadian politician ever use before in my life. And the things he was saying brought me to tears. And after coming out of the Harper years where our communities really suffered from those omnibus bills that they pushed through and the changes in the laws in our communities, we're still reeling from those. But after that, it was such a breath of fresh air. Never mind that his dad came out with a 1969 white paper that was all about assimilating and terminating Indigenous rights, and we didn't forget about that. But his son was saying these things and using language that only be used, and I had this hope. And so many of us are so, and even more angry, because he said all the right things, and we got this hope, only to be just dashed again. And it's just like, why did we think Canada would ever change? Why did we think Canada, because you know what, we've never, ever been given any reason to think otherwise. So it's always about actions, not words. How do you live, right? So say less or say little, do more. And what he's doing shows where, you know, and maybe deep inside, he really believes that. And I don't know him as an individual, but I'm just talking as a leader. He said those things about a lot of hope. I don't really have a lot of faith in Canada has a long-term objective, and honoring Indigenous lands and territories is not part of that objective, and never will be unless the people demand it.
I was wondering, you talked about how devastating this extractive resources is to breaking the laws of nature. So I was just wondering your perspective that we still use it. There's this argument that we need the internet and we need these devices as tools. Or is that just kind of giving into that temptation? Like, would we be better off if we all just started rejecting their technology so it wouldn't be produced anymore and trying to start the ball rolling that way than continuing to make excuses as to why we need to keep using it?
Right. So that's a really good question. I love the internet. It's my favorite thing in the world. Like, I really love it. Like, look at all these things I was able to do. I'm a lifelong learner. I mean, I want my Wi-Fi all the time. So I totally get it. And I really love it. I also love my vehicle. I love a lot of modern life. I mean, I like it. And we talk about this. Like I'm not living out on the bush all the time. I live out on Reese's. I mean, I spend a lot of time out there, but I mean, I'm living a very modern life, and I enjoy it. And really, it's about looking at ourselves and asking these really hard questions. What do we need? Do we need the internet? Yeah, we need the internet for a certain way of life that we've created. But when it really, really comes down to it, the warnings we're getting in our lives are so profound and serious that, I don't have an answer for how that's going to look. But what I know to be true deep down is that we're not just going to tweak things a bit and get through this without having to change anything. So everything's going to have to vastly change. And maybe, I mean, I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. We have these directions that we're getting, right? And they're kind of our projection models. But they're really talking about adhering to these natural laws. So there is a way. Is there a way that we can come together with all of our ideas to honor that way? And what I'm seeing is a cookie-cutter approach. There's one approach for all things. And so, I mean, I don't know the internet in particular, but I'm sorry, when I look at our natural laws and how we're supposed to be living and addressing these challenges, we have prophecies about these, about which way we're going to choose. And my son has an iPad, and he sure loves watching Roblox videos and Minecraft videos on YouTube. He really loves it. But you know what he loves more? He loves being the big watch. He loves singing those songs. He loves getting dirt under his fingernails, climbing trees, and getting up there and doing that. And I feel better. I remember being at a big lodge, and this is our 4-day rain dance lodges, and some dance lodges. We fast, we pray, it's a big sacrifice. There's a lot of things that we do. They're open to come if you know people, if you're interested in learning more. But we do the sacrifice, and I remember somebody on the Sunday after it was all done leaving, and they said, oh, time to go back to the real world. For us, that's the real world. And we're going back to this like concocted society that's been created around us. I don't have an answer for that, so all I have again is I always pray. We lift our pipes and we pray and we ask, and I want to tweak the system and just have everything like be really cool and awesome and have all the comforts. I really want that, but that's not what we need. And our people are lacking connection. All people, they're lacking connection. Like when you get out on the land and you sit in a circle, like our kinship systems are extensive. So I think instead of looking at what we stand to lose, let's shift our perspective and look at what we stand to gain. Community building. We're not going to get through this in this individualistic society where we have little homes all to ourselves or big homes all to ourselves with our own Wi-Fi connection, cooking meals all ourselves and going to work and everything. We're going to have to lean on one another and build real community. And the joy that comes with real community, when we look at parenting and schooling and the stress of being a single parent. Like, we have this opportunity to rebuild kinship systems. And if you look at Indigenous kinship systems, nobody was an orphan, nobody was left alone. We didn't have child and family services. We didn't have all of these things that we have in this society. We had other things. And if you look at them, I think that you'll see more to gain than we have to lose. So I think the question is, not like, oh, we lose our favorite things, but really look at what could we stand to gain. And it requires sacrifice. And we know what sacrifice is to fasting. Like, not just food, but water and piercing and other things that we do. So I'll just consider that. But I hope we can keep the internet. I would like to.
So you talked about ceremony. And I remember something in Braiding Sweetgrass where she talks about like white folks needing to develop ceremony again, and not just grab Indigenous ceremony. And I'm just wondering if you have thoughts on like where to start with that. Like, my roots go back to Scotland. Maybe there's Celtic ceremony there, but that feels really detached for me.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I love this question. So this is the thing, this goes all the way to why everything's political. Being an Indigenous person, talking about anything is political. But, so our ways, our ceremonies are mostly still intact. I mean, they've taken a huge beating. They're not mostly intact. We have threads that we're rebuilding on. But they got destroyed in the last 100 years. When you look at like Celtic traditions or other land-based, like the reality is all people in the history of the world, like we were all land-based people at one point, or tribal-based people at one point. It's just at what point did those knowledge systems get interrupted? So whether it was through the church or the state or kingdoms or whatever, at what point were people ripped from the land in your home territories, if it's someplace in England or other countries, looking back to that, right? So that disconnection for a lot of people of European ancestry happened way further back. And I think today, as we're facing this global crisis, there is this recognition in our spirits that we need something deeper that's going to carry us through. This is a call for us to evolve in a different way, in a very deeply spiritual way. So I think there is a growing desire for people to come back to ceremony. So I would look back to that, like, yeah, you had that at one point. It was just interrupted or stolen much further back in history than it has been for us on these lands and territories. The other thing to consider is in the New Age community in particular, but really, I mean, it's this whole idea, again, that people, mainstream people, I use the term white, I say I'm half white. I know that not everyone likes that, but we can talk about that after. But I'm gonna use it because I self-identify as being half white, and that's how my family identifies and stuff like that. But there is this tendency for people who are looking for spirituality to come and take. And like, it's just another form of taking. Like, our lands were taken, our children were taken, all our relatives were taken, and now it's like, okay, now you want, like, and you're trying to take these, not you in particular, right? But just, you're trying to take these now too. So there is that sense. However, you don't have to. You can come and sit with us in circle and be part of us. So White Raven Healing Center in Fort Capel, the All Nations Healing Hospital, they have sweat lodges all throughout the month. Every 2 weeks on a Monday, there's a men's only sweat. The last Tuesday of every month is a women's only sweat. And every Thursday, there's a co-ed sweat. And so if you're interested in learning, just come out on Thursday night at 6 p.m. at the White Raven Healing Lodge and come and sit and ask. Bring some tobacco. And you can get some like pipe tobacco or like tobacco in a pipe shop, which is really nice, but cigarettes work too. I mean, it's just, whatever. Just bring something like that. Or bring a pot of soup, or bring something and just come and sit and learn. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's a long time, right? So come and sit with it. That's what we want. We want humble yourself, remember? Right? So we need to humble ourselves. So just come. We're all pitiful people in ceremony. Come and sit with us. And there's lots of newbies, people that come for the first time and don't know what to do. And there's many kind and loving people. So if you just come and say, hey, it's my first time, then we know, and then we'll teach you. And you just keep coming and coming, and there's lots of white people. Like there's Ed English who's always coming, and we're always joking that he's like one of us, like he's been in ceremony long enough, he understands all the ways. So it's about developing relationships. That's what it is. If you're going in for yourself and just taking ceremony for your own benefit, that's a taking and it's individualistic. Our ceremonies are community-based. So come and sit and be part of the circle, and that's how we're going to build relationships with one another, because all the spiritual stuff I talked about is learned in ceremony. So come sit in ceremony, and that's going to help address this big global crisis we're facing. Same with all the other stuff too, with all the moral. But you come, I'll write the number down. Come set. So.
Hello. You mentioned potash mining.
Yes.
And mine was picked up because, I mean, generally you're thinking of pipelines and all that. I'm just wondering, is there any particular information about potash mining in Saskatchewan that we're not aware of vis-a-vis infringement on Indigenous lands? I'm just wondering why, if there's any particular information about potash mining in Saskatchewan that I'm not aware of, or we're not aware of.
Right, right. So yeah, so I mean, it's not specific to potash. It would be really any kind of extractive resource industry. And I know that's like broad, like, well, are we supposed to live in this modern society? But again, just going back to how was the land acquired? Was it a legitimate transfer? And Canada doesn't. It's illegitimate. If you look at the history, the way the land was acquired was through force, coercion, through lying. We have a hostile occupation, so we're here in our homeland. So really, any kind of mining operation, pipeline, any farming operations, and so, oh, well, my land was sold for. Look at the history. Look at the history where the land came from. Go back as far as you can. The resources are out there. They're all in your own records. Sorry, your own records, or my records too. But they're all, it's all there. But where was that land originally? Like who originally lived there and who was displaced to allow that to happen? Because somebody was. People, animals, ecosystems, something. And that also because it's a mining operation is breaking natural law. And then also you look at, say, like, I do food sovereignty work, right? And so you look at like the natural cycles of food. And so you look at potash as fertilizer, right? And so what it's essentially helping us do is demand more and more and more from the soil without giving it a chance to rest. So how are we honoring the cycles of the earth, of Mother Earth? So as we grow, there's a natural cycle. So when you look at Indigenous food systems, they were in cycles and balance. And so what we're doing is we're demanding more and more, and then we're using potash as fertilizer to demand even more and more. And if you look at topsoil, we're looking at like 60 years of topsoil left around the world. And so like this is a really serious issue. So that's another thing that I can get into. And I do have a presentation that's all about Indigenous food security, sovereignty, and the impacts of climate change. So it's different from this. But that's kind of why that one probably perked up, is because I do talk about potash in that regards. But remember at the very beginning when I talked about the depth of an arm? And there's a reason for that. So they talk about spiritual beings. So, come sit in ceremony and be like, this lady's crazy. What's she talking about? Spiritual beings. I get that some of you guys are thinking that, and that's fine. But come and sit. Come and learn and open your mind to it. So, yeah.
Okay, you talk about Canada being an illegitimate state. Okay? And almost all of us have accepted the violence and the horror of residential schools. Okay? Now this is something my friend Sylvia McCann tweeted me in a couple years ago. We had the privilege to spend a weekend in the Nelson Mandela Dialogue. And we're in a group, and Sylvia said, Regina, Canada is a secular state. Okay? Kind of know that, but like I internalize it. So I think the way to think about this, family's having a hard time kind of grasping at this. Think of the violence and the horror of residential schools. But think about it in every aspect of life, right? The relationship with the land, all of those different relations. There's been that same kind of attack, that communist from capitalism, but that's what's going on. It's a totally different kind of relationship. And once we who aren't part of that circle can start thinking about it that way, we're going to come at it, in a whole other direction.
Yes. Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And I really appreciate the work that you do. And this is the thing about power privilege and having an Indigenous voice is like most people don't care. Because we've been saying this for years. We say, stop doing this, and it hasn't changed. What's going to change are separate Canadians. If you don't like that term, examine why you don't like that. So just take a look inside. But really, again, it's going to be a change in the hearts and minds of Canadians to look at that, to examine that history. And and to challenge that, because we've been shouting it for years. Yeah, so you're absolutely right. There's different ways to come. So this is plant the seed. There's many more resources, and frankly, most people will be more apt to hear it from somebody who looks like them than somebody like me. That's just a fact.
Hi. I'm an atheist, and I see no point to having my life dictated by old fairy tales. And I just don't see the point to having a spiritual connection or anything like that, because I just don't see how that even exists. And like, my mom's Wiccan Druidic beliefs seem amusing, and my dad's side is Native, and that seems like amusing too, those kinds of beliefs. My dad is personally Catholic, he got turned Catholic, and that's probably what first set me on the road to being atheist, just because of how sexist it is, and how much I just really hated, did not like that. And that first set me on that, because how much homophobia and sexism I saw from Christianity, from the three Abrahamic religions in general. But then I started looking at more and more religions, and just now it's at the point where I'm just like, I don't really see the point of a spiritual connection. So even after listening to you talk, like, what would you suggest there? Or just what would you just talk about, I guess, on that matter?
Sure. So that's okay. If you have a spiritual connection, that's totally okay. And if you're interested in addressing climate change from an Indigenous perspective, then you can do it through ways of looking at UNDRIP, the United Nations Rights on the Declarations of Indigenous Peoples, or reaching out to MLAs, or coming to marches and rallies. And there's still many ways of supporting. You could look at it as a human rights issue, social justice.
Yeah, like I do a lot of that, but I just don't see, like, a lot of what you're talking about is that there needs to be a spiritual connection. I just don't see the point to that. And so just how do you, like,
do you think that there's something missing there, or not? Or it sounds like you know how to like phrase the question in just a way that why does there have to be a spiritual connection to approach caring about nature when it comes to environmental rights and human rights, animal rights?
Sure. It's a very personal, individual exploration as to why you don't. And that's fine. And I'm not here to convince anybody that you need to do that personally. But what I'm sharing is our philosophy and teachings and how they are rooted. And so I don't need anybody in this room to believe in these ways. I believe in them. And I know the road that I walk. And I know what I'm here to share. And that's also not to say that anybody else is wrong, because that's not part of our teachings. I'm not going to say this is the only way. What I'm saying is this is our way. This is the way of this land. And this is what we've been given and taught. And my experiences are such that it's not belief. My experiences of the grandmothers and grandfathers are as real as this computer here right now. See? But not everybody has that connection, right? And the whole world is filled with different religious beliefs and connections, and that's okay. We're all going to contribute some part. And so there's no point in you pursuing a spiritual approach if it doesn't speak to you. This climate crisis is going to require that we all bring our gifts, our contributions. So if this doesn't fit with you, that's okay. Take what fits and leave the rest. And so if there was something that really spoke to you that feels like, okay, I can get behind that because that feels good to me, then do that. And if you don't believe in any of this, that's okay. I still walk this path, and I know I know that, my dad's like that too. My dad's like, oh, you're crazy. That's okay.
Hi. So earlier you talked about how Canada is illegitimate, and that, pretty sure if I'm getting this right, total reconciliation would be giving back the land, all the land. So I guess my question is, what would be ideal for you? What would that look like to you, and how could we make that happen? And what would that look like?
Right, okay. That is a really great question. How have I longed to hear somebody say, how can we work on giving the land back? So there's actually a few ways. So there is, Emily, what's the name? Is it Treaty Land Sharing Network? Right, okay. So there's a newer organization, and my husband's involved with that. I'm working with landowners and other people to collaborate with Indigenous peoples on sharing and providing access to lands. There is also the Nature Conservancy of Canada that is purchasing lots of native prairie and other places right across Canada to preserve and working with Indigenous peoples to provide access. And access, full access, not access with permission slips and detailing what we're going to do, but full on permission. Looking at crown lands being turned over. We're looking at, say, even if you look at like the public pastures a few years ago was a big deal how the federal government had offset the responsibility of those to the provinces and stuff. That could have just easily been done. And people say, oh no, it's so complicated. But is it? Like, you just don't want to do it. Nobody wants to give up power. And all the power in this country comes from the land because that's where all the resources come from, and the resources is what makes the money and makes the economy go, and nobody wants to give that up. So how? I would join these organizations, would be the Treaty Land Sharing Network. I would understand Canadian history, and I would start to be really vocal with MPs and MLAs about it. But coming and it's a really new conversation. So I'm saying, how hard is it? I don't know. But again, we figured out all sorts of things. I think we can figure this out. It's just about the will. And again, it's about Canadians looking deep inside. And how do you feel about giving the land back? What are you afraid of? What do you think is going to happen? You know, people think that we're going to treat you the same way we've been treated. I've come across this. People are afraid. And it's not in our teachings. So, after there was a violent encounter about one of the reserves a few years ago, or after the Gerald Stanley case, Golden Bush, it was a really hard time. And I was talking to my dad about this, and he said, I'm scared to go to reserve. I would never step foot on them right now. And I was like, why? Like, you're not going to come visit me? Or what's going on? And he's like, after what happened, he's like, my life would be in danger. I would be, keep in mind that like a 22-year-old Indigenous man got shot in the back of the head, and you know, that's a big heartbreaking case. So, but it was this whole idea that I'm in danger. And I was like, you know what? People were angry. I mean, I listened to a lot of Rage Against the Machine that week. Continued to process my feelings. We poured ourselves into ceremony. There's individuals that might do things like that, but as a collective, we're peaceful. This is why I talk about the spirituality of the teachings. Because we don't do that. All of our relations, what we do to you, we do to us. And so, why am I going off on this tangent? It's why are people afraid of getting the land back? Not want to share resources, not sure what we're going to do with it. Are we going to run it right? Maybe check our journalism? Really, like, not you individually, but as a collective. Like these are the triggering conversations, the things that I said are going to make you guys mad. But these are the things that Canada needs to grapple with. And why do we need to do it in the face of climate change? You know, land back is reconciliation because everything, our languages come from the land, our kinship systems come from the land, our health and wellness comes from the land, our economies come from the land. Every single metric that you use to measure a society comes from the land. And you guys know that because you own the land. And so there's a reason that we're living in poverty and that kind of thing because we've been dispossessed. And so I don't know exactly how that would look, but it can be done.
Hi, English. Thank you very much, Michelle. You asked for people of privilege to provide leadership or join in as partners. So let me stand up and introduce myself, and then I'll try and give an example that touch on a couple of questions. My name is Peter Levitt. I'm a professor in environmental biology at the University of Regina. I work on water. So you've heard questions about potash mining and questions about spirituality. So I've been working in Western Canada for about 35 years. And what I've come to realize is that virtually everything you heard Michelle say is exactly the same in environmental science. The world is connected. The world is complicated. The passage of time absolutely matters to understand how we arrive where we are and where we're going into the future. You don't have to be spiritual to take this view. As Michelle says, there's plenty of spirit to go around. But there is the opportunity to participate in this, bringing your own skills to the table. There's a question about potash, whether there was some lurking issue here. I'll give you an example. The Canada Golden Fortune potash mine coming is planning, or actually has put a proposal into the province to extract water from the Hatfield aquifer. And there's been an engineering study done by SNC Lavalin. I wish I was making that up, but I'm not. And the project has been given approval without environmental impacts assessment and without duty to consult. So how the word duty seems to be. The mine will extract water 400 feet from the edge of the Zackame, Anishinaabe, and Cowessess First Nations, and it will do so at the same depth as the community well. The engineering firm will say we will take 15% of the aquifer that is in perpetuity because the water doesn't replace very well. That's one mine. Right now, potash has almost no international value. When it does, I promise you there will be more than one mine. If you're concerned about this, band with Chief Linnacoos, Chief Adam Storm of the two nations, and side with them to tell the government this is not acceptable. We don't want groundwater. There's lots of other sources of water we can consider. So this is an example where science and Indigenous rights absolutely go together. So I'm sorry, I'm sort of upset now, so I'm about soapbox time. There isn't, in my estimation, any distinction, any difference. If we protect the world, we're all protecting ourselves. Oh, I have one question though. It's a strange one. If it were possible to revisit treaty, do you think the Creator would allow it to be engaged again?
It's an interesting question. Thank you for everything you shared. I do, because it already did. So Creator at that time, and our ceremonies were there, and we were directed and guided everything. I don't think there's any mistakes in our guidance. Of course, I wish things would be different. But I think we were shown what was going to happen. These prophecies were placed long before. So it's interesting to me. I would think less about how did the past roll out and how could it be different, and more about how are we being called to change today. Like, maybe it was part of this, lost what I was thinking off the top of my head. But I don't think he makes mistakes, is what I'm saying. And I'm also thinking that it's also part of an evolutionary growth. I think that's required for this Western paradigm to really examine and look at. So I think the opportunity is really for that examination. I'm going to think about this a little bit more. I'm talking off the top of my head without having time to sit with it. And most of the things I talk about, I've had time to sit, out fasting or in ceremony to consider. So this is an interesting question. I do appreciate everything you said. And this is a perfect example of how, if the communities, First Nations communities say we don't want this water use, that might not really go anywhere. But if the landowners and cottage owners or other people in the area surrounding that area were to speak up and say something, I think they'd be more apt to listen. Consider that. So I really appreciate that's a really good example. And it's really imperative too that you guys share that information with one another, on how to step up and do that kind of work. I'll think about that question more though. Next time we run into each other, I'll let you know what I pondered on. Maybe I'll ask him myself. I'm just kidding. I'm kind of sleeping. I'm good.
So last question right here.
Hi there, my name is Shiloh. I'm from Treaty 6 Indigenous-led First Nations.
Oh, you're stick with the relatives up there, like they're sticking with those guys.
I'm just kind of bewildered. I don't know, it's like, why don't we overthinking this too much to its perspective where we pause action, why don't we take a step back and be able to converse about the environmental changes within our communities, and why don't we discuss about what could be an alternative measure instead of having the oil as the main fight, to be able to run our government's economy. Why are we having this discussion as a community to be able to have like natural energies in the place of Canada? We, as a spiritual guy, to be able to find out that the wind's going in all directions. While we talk about having wind turbines instead of, going into combustion electricity or coal, stuff like that matters, or solar panels, or as well hydro dams, to be able to limit the whole fight for this one product that, we cease to exist to use anymore. If someone was bringing us to an extinction, like if we want to start working, why don't we start working together as collaborative to be able to get renewed energy sources and to be able to transition the oil type of workers into that type of atmosphere. And that's the type of dialogue I want to be able to bring in. First Nations have abandoned this town, this dual world that we live in. It's a spiritual indigenous man, and this is one that's another working man in the society that we live in. While we have community discussions about that.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with everything you're saying. And why aren't we? That's the question. I think we are. People are having those conversations. And yeah, so was your question just why aren't we having these conversations?
Well, it's more or less like let's start having some dialogue in what we're trying to get at instead of, this side of it and this side to, regulate even more. Mm-hmm. Let's take a step back and even know where our existence is.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I agree with everything you just said. And that's what it requires these conversations, is reimagining everything. And I just think really, it's a finite resource. It's going to run out sooner or later. Why aren't we just doing so? Why are we going to the bitter end? I don't know why. I guess that's. I think there's just so much potential for everything you said, and it's all going to look different. So what's it going to look like and stick with? And we should be having these conversations. And I think we are. And that's what Indigenous Climate Action is all about. It's all about what are these solutions. I could have gone more into the specific projects and campaigns that we have going. Just go to the website and look at it yourself and educate, and learn more about that. I really wanted to bring this other perspective because I think it's vital and it's not being talked about very much because it's really about re-envisioning everything. And so, and there's so many solar projects and wind projects that are going forward or other things. And look at this Dr. Daniel Wildcat. It's an old book. It's called Red Alert. And how Indigenous solutions to these issues. That's he coined the term indigenuity. So that's what I'd like to start talking about, is those things. And really it's about social justice, human justice, like all of these things, it's all interconnected, right? So those are the conversations. Thank you for sharing. And see, I was like, none of you guys, no one else here told me where you were from. He's like, hi, I'm from Minnestickwin. I said, oh, hey, your relatives in Minnestickwin. This is what I mean by kinship. As Indigenous people, we don't say, well, hi, I'm Michelle, I'm a journalist, or I'm a speaker. That's my bio, because that's kind of what's expected. But we don't mostly identify ourselves by our jobs. This is kind of what we do. But where we are, who we are, where we come from. Minnestickwin, I said from Yellowclaw, I live in Beaches. We're rooted to the land. And anyway, so rebuilding that kinship, it all ties together. I think we just have this potential to really dig into who we are and to create a multitude of societies because they would all look different. You imagine going to some other place and be like, wow, this is like all a mountain and forest. How would their societies be set up in their economies and everything local with some, with all the technological contributions to that compared to here, compared to Lake in the Woods, or compared to Prince Edward Island. There's just so much potential for diversity and Like, that's why I get hopeful. There's so much. I think we're focusing on the wrong stuff. We have better things to think about and better things to talk about. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just a few things for me before we wrap up, but I'm just thinking about an article that I read by Nick Estes that appeared in Jacobin in August, and he was talking about the Red New Deal. And several things jumped out from the American Homestead Act in 1762. I think since then, 270 million acres of land have been used for white settlers. And there's a great line from him where he says, how when land is stolen, it is never treated ethically. I just really love that. And also how the environmental movement often forgets what Indigenous people are doing, forgets about Indigenous people. And when I read that, it was a kind of shock. I know it's not a shock for you, but I just wanted to bring it into the conversation. And I really want to use a very academic term to say a big thank you for your kick-ass talk.
Thank you.